Hi friends, welcome back to my channel, welcome back to my book entries, and welcome back to my little bookshelf on the internet. My name is Caroline and I am very glad that you're tuning in every single week to hear me talk about books. I am a full-time research student with a 9-to-5 job, but I'm also somebody who's very passionate about reading and my love for content creation is just top tier. So my entire personality trait is figuring how to fit reading and content creation into my very hectic and busy schedule. So if that sounds like right up your alley and something that you're interested in seeing more, then keep on watching because this week we're talking about some of the books that I read in June. Hi friends, how are we doing? How was your reading goals in June? Did you read a lot of books? For me personally, I did read a little bit more books than I anticipated and I was very surprised, pleasantly surprised if you will. June is a decent reading month for me. I read a lot of books that are outside of my comfort zone. I continue reading books from my favorite authors. I read books from authors I've never read before, and it was a bit of a challenging but very fun and exciting month. Also, if I'm looking down, it's because I have my little journal down here with me and I wrote down every single book that I read, just a bit of bookkeeping because I cannot remember everything on the top of my head. Most of the books that I read was library books, so I don't have physical copies of them except for 3 books I'm gonna show you in a second, but then the rest I'm gonna be showing pictures on screen. Okay, let's get straight into the video. I started the month off by finishing one of my summer project books, and that was Vanity Fair. I gave Vanity Fair a 4.25. I thought it was brilliant. It was one of the books that I read that was quite hard in my opinion, just because it followed a lot of characters. We have 2 heroines. We have Rebecca Sharp and Amelia Sedley. They came from such different backgrounds and upbringings. Amelia Sedley, she came from a very noble and wealthy family, and Rebecca Sharp, she is the daughter of an artist, and so she didn't have a lot of money. But one thing about them is that they went to the same school for girls and they got the same training and everything, and during that time they became friends because Rebecca was this sort of very weird, unusual and pretty outspoken person, and you know how like girls back then, they were not supposed to be outspoken. Amelia was the only person who was very sympathetic and really understanding of Rebecca. She was the only friend that Rebecca had, to be honest. One misfortune coming to Amelia and her family in that her family fell from wealth and she now became pretty impoverished, whereas Rebecca, she continuously climbed the ladder because of her wit, her appearance, gracefulness, and being very good with etiquette and manner, and because of that people perceive her to be very noble and wealthy, whereas she was not noble and wealthy. She and her husband lived on nothing. They don't have a job. Her husband retired from the guards and she didn't work, but because of their way of talking, their way of representing themselves, their way of carrying themselves, they were able to live such extravagant lives. There was also commentary on motherhood because Rebecca and Amelia, they were very different mothers. Rebecca, I would say she loves the fame of having a son than actually having a son herself, which is very interesting. Throughout the story, we saw how she didn't treat her son very well. She only treated him well when people were around, whereas Amelia, we saw such a vivid and lively description of her passionate love for her son and also her late husband. We also follow a semi-little love story between Amelia and Sir William Dobbins, which was the captain of the army that her late husband used to be in. It is being compared to War and Peace by Leo Tolstoy because of its nature of following a vast cast of characters. The writer has a way of writing the story in that we feel like we're actually in Vanity Fair. I found that the political context and the description of the political context at the time was very hard to understand, but I did get myself pretty familiar with the Napoleonic War and how there was tension between the French and the English people. I feel like after reading this book, I was like so much smarter, and I am now prepared, at least to a certain extent, to read War and Peace by Leo Tolstoy. So that was Vanity Fair by William Makepeace Thackeray, another classic and another summer project books that I finished at the beginning of June. Next, we moved on to a very light read. I read Blue Nights by Joan Didion. This is a very short book and a very nice break from the English and the classic heavy book. This is my first memoir, also my first book from Joan Didion. This is a book about her journey of navigating and coming to understand the death of her daughter and the passing away of so many people around her, and that was so heartbreaking. The prose was very beautiful. One thing that I found very interesting was the discussion of the parenting techniques and the mindset that parents used to have when the war was happening. Like, remember back in World War II, 2, the parents back at the time, meaning our grandparents or great-grandparents, their only concern was trying to survive. They did not necessarily put a big emphasis on, mental health, creative life, or artistic life, and other pursuits besides surviving. And because of that, our parents had a bit of a leeway and a bit of a freedom in experiencing life to their fullest. Not only the good side of life, but also the bad sides of life. How they were pretty free to do drugs or travel without notifying, not having to communicate much with their parents, meaning our grandparents. Our generation was very different. There's this hyper focus and hypersensitivity coming from our parents because they were always worried that there might be some danger coming to us. Because of that indifference resulting from the grandparents aspect, that trickled down to this hypersensitivity and hyper scrutiny from our parents to us. It was a very interesting discussion and intercourse about parenting. One thing that I do want to say is that I understood the basic premise of her life, but then there's this analogy of blue nights that I necessarily could not wrap my head around. I vaguely understand that it is to symbolize the passing of seasons. I don't know what the metaphor and the analogy of that really actually mean. Also, that was a 3 stars, by the way. Forgot to mention the rating. We did a 24-hour readathon, which the video of that is already up on live on my YouTube channel. That was a fun challenge, although it was a pretty exhausting and draining one. I did enjoy it though, and I feel like doing it once every month was gonna be a good cleanse almost, and a good pushing and motivation for me to read more. But I read a lot of books in that readathon. I finished 3 and 2.5 books. We finished Red Rising, and that is the first book by Pierce Brown in his Red Rising saga series. It's a completed trilogy, and I am on the verge of reading book 2, just that I needed a bit of time from that world for a second. It is, I would say, a dystopian book, and it talks about Yarros and how the society that they lived in was segregated and divided by colors in terms of skin complexions. We have the reds at the bottom of the totem pole, and then the golds and the coppers, they kind of dominate and rule over everybody else, especially the golds. We follow Yarros as a lower red. He spent most of his life down underground. All their life, they believed this lie that the government and the system told them, is that we needed a certain chemical or a certain substance called helium-3. That is the only substance that is available underground. And until we have enough of that helium-3, we could really pioneer and make Mars habitable for other colors. In a sense, the reds believe that they are the pioneers and they are the one who, sacrifice and work hard and lay the groundwork for other colors to follow. They thought that Mars is not yet habitable on the ground. Turns out that is complete lie. Yarros infiltrating the Golden Society, he changed his color, he changed his skin, he changed his eyeballs, he changed his personality, his accent, everything about him, so that he can infiltrate and kind of mingle, live among the gods, to learn their ways of ruling, to even enlist in one of their most prestigious schools, to then get a revenge on them, basically. The first book follows him as he got enlisted into House of Mars. Each group of students, they were sorted into different houses. We have House of Mars, House of Jupiter, House of Mercury, House of Athena. Each house got assigned a territory, and their task was to protect that territory and also conquer other houses. So it's a 4.25 coming from me, not necessarily a 5-star, but I think this first book did a great job in laying down the foundation for other books to follow. So the next book in the 24-hour readathon that I finished was Greta and Valdin. This is such a beautiful read and a beautiful break from the world of Red Rising. This is a story about Greta and Valdin. They are siblings, and we follow them as they navigate their sibling relationship, their romantic relationship, also familial relationship as well, interacting with their parents, their aunts, uncle, nephew, nieces. These are just very ordinary and mundane pieces of stories and slices of life. And also reading this in Pride Month was very, very pleasant. And I especially loved Valdin because he reminded me a lot about my brother. He had this kind of situationship, if you will, with his ex-boyfriend. There is this trope of miscommunication trope being covered. There are also tropes of second chance romances being covered. Valdin and and his ex-boyfriend, they have such a beautiful relationship. Greta has to learn how to find the right partner for her, who does not look down upon her, who values her opinions and her personality, who is genuinely interested in her work and her PhD. Although the ending kind of shook me in the not so positive way, the ending kind of got convoluted because I think the author is trying to also include some representation of polyamory. Okay, I'm not uncomfortable with polyamory and I love polyamorous people, but I don't think the trope or the topic was done beautifully to the point that I can understand it. It was rather confusing in my opinion because I now don't know what's going on with their family. I took off points for that, but this is a 2.75 stars. And then the next book that I read in that 24-hour readathon was All the Other Mothers Hate Me. This is a true crime fiction thriller mystery book. This one, I gave it a 2.5 stars. Hear me out. I enjoyed the premise. I think it was a very good book. We follow Florence Grimes, a single mom, broken, poor, hoary girl, and her son, Dylan, in their life, basically. And one thing about Florence Grimes is that the other mothers of the other kids at her son's school, they don't like Florence for some reason. One day after a certain school road trip, one kid from the class went missing. What are the odds that that kid is Dylan's bully? Also, Dylan and that kid were in the same group going to that road trip, so now that kid's missing, Dylan became the prime suspect. And so to avoid Dylan being jailed and being interrogated and being questioned, Florence has to do everything in her power to try to figure out what the freak went wrong. There was Alfie Risby. And Alfie Risby, he is the son of this very giant, wealthy, very established company. I did not expect for the story to be this slow. There were moments where the story picked up and the pacing picked up, but then most of it was rather like that. And I came into this book expecting it to be a very exciting, addicting, page-turning read, which I needed that. I was craving that after like 18 hours of reading continuously, but I did not get that from that book, so I was a bit disappointed. Did not really resonate a lot with Florence, and I did not really root for her, and I did not really, care for her. Certain decisions that she made, I was like, ooh, why did you do that? You know what I mean? She left her son, her 10-year-old son, at home alone when she went to party. And I was like, okay, 1 time, 2 times, that's okay. But then the 3rd time comes around, I'm like, okay, that is some serious red flag. That exact night was the night that her son went missing as well. Yes, I know. Yes. The next book that I finished was George Orwell's 1984. I've been meaning to get my hand onto this book for a while, and I still have the afterwords and the acknowledgement section. This is another dystopian read, and I gave this book a 3.75 stars. Okay, hear me out. I know this is a classic. We have an authoritarian government, kind of a dictatorship called Big Brother. Winston Smith, the main protagonist, he works as a member of the Ministry of Truth. He works in the records department, and his job is solely rectifying and rewriting different records, different articles, different works of literature to make sure that they all align with whatever the government and Big Brother are saying at the time. So that means that the past can be rewritten and rewritten over and over and over again just to make sure that whatever the government is saying is truth. The other thing that really stuck out to me was this concept of doublethink. And doublethink is a concept where we have 2 contradictory statements and 2 contradictory beliefs, ideologies, phenomenons, but they can coexist in the same sentence or in the same world or in the same society. For example, this society promotes growth, civilization, well-being of the citizen, but it also starves the citizen. They cut out food portions very often. They did not promote freedom of speech. They did not promote freedom of thought. Journalism is nothing in this world. That notion was very interesting, and how they control literally and basically everything. It was a very hard read, but I think it is a very important read. Give this a bit of time, be patient with this book, really reflect on how much of a mirror image this work of literature is compared to our realistic world. The next book that I finished was Blood of a Bright Haven by Emma Wang, and this is The Other Standalone by Emma Wang that I've been intimidated to read for the longest time after I finished Sword of Kaigen. Sword of Kaigen is my #1 still favorite book I think of the entire year. I do need to reread it though, because I'm curious to see if it really holds up. But Blood Over Brighthaven is the other book by Wang. I would say this is another book that is pretty dystopian, also with a mix of fantasy. This book is set in a world where females are not supposed to do anything, and they are not given any position in the government, and because of that, there has never been a female high mage in history of the city of Tehran. And the city of Tehran, one thing that's very interesting and unique about the city is that it is surrounded by this magical barrier, kind of shaped like a dome, and that barrier is supposed to protect the people of Tehran from something called the Blight. The Blight is like a plague, a magical plague if you think of it that way. And so the people outside that barrier, called the Quen, Kwen, they are not under the protection of this barrier. They're very susceptible and very susceptible to this blight. And this blight is very, very gruesome. The book opens with a description of the blight and first-hand experiences of the blight coming from the other protagonist, I think, called Tomio. Hopefully I'm pronouncing his name correctly. He is a member of a tribe called the Caldone. They recently got to cross this river to maybe enter into the city of Tehran to be under this protection of the magical barrier. As they were crossing the river, the blight took away the life of almost every single person in this tribe, except for Tomio and his niece. Tomio had to work, and he worked in this magistry center where Siona, the other female protagonist, works at. And Siona recently made history as being the first female high mage in history. The magic system in this world is very interesting, and I've never seen something like this before. It is based on, I would say loosely, the typewriter, where you would like type in your code and your spells, and then the spellographs will siphon the energy from the other realm. When she becomes an actual high mage, she works in this magic center, and most of her colleagues are males, and they don't tolerate very well with her being the first female person to be their equals. Tomio, by some coincidence, became Siona's assistant, and the two of them discover something that is literally groundbreaking and world-shattering about the city of Tehran, and how basically their magic and their magic system is built upon a lie. It was a very good book, I do have to say. Wang has now officially become my must-buy author and my auto-buy author. I finished this book, and I was just like sitting there, staring at the wall for like 15 minutes because I did not know what to think. It's wonderful. 4.5. And then second to last book that I read was Deep End by Ali Hazelwood. This is my first Ali Hazelwood, and I was thoroughly surprised. I gave it a 4.75 stars. That's the highest rating I've ever given to a romance book. It is a sports romance book. It is set in Stanford between a swimmer and a diver. Scarlett Vandermeer is our diver. Lucas Bloomvist, hopefully I'm pronouncing his last name correctly, is a swimmer. They bonded through this mutual interest in kink, and so like BDSM, sexual preferences, all of those stuff. Please check the trigger warnings if you're thinking of reading this book. I think Ali Hazelwood did it in a very, very gradual way that she did not shock us with upfront info dumping discussion of kinky and BDSM, all of those stuff. And she also focused on mental health, trauma issues, really the background of the characters to make sure that we understand where they're coming from. Even with the kinky stuff and their sex life, it was not over the top. It's not the most spiciest book I've ever read. I didn't have any problem with that. And this is one of the books that I recommend going into the book, knowing at least a premise of the book and what it's about. You have to at least know what you're getting yourself into before going into the book. I love Scarlett and Lucas' story. It was just so real. But it's not a 5-star because for one reason. The first half of the book, Scarlett suffered from lots of things. She feels like her life is falling apart because she's not doing well academically. She recently got injured, and so she couldn't do her sports correctly. She didn't find a spark in diving again. Her love life is shit. She didn't have anybody. She's overwhelmed. She's stressed. She feels like she's getting nowhere. But then the later half of the book, she suddenly become this all-powerful, overachiever, perfect person. Turns out she got all A's on all of her classes. She's now the winner of the Olympic gold medal for diving. She now has this perfect relationship, and everything just took that turn pretty abruptly from nobody to somebody. You know what I mean? That was not very convincing because of how frequently she complained about her German class being the worst class that she's ever taken. She did not do well on the exam, but then turns out she still got an A, at least A minus, but still, I don't see how. I don't think that's convincing, and so I took off points for that. I would at least love to see some aspects where she did not excel and she was comfortable in her not excelling in that aspect, and that really would have tied the story, then the mental health aspect and the self-validation and the self-approval aspect of the story. That's deep end. I would definitely be reading other stuff from her. I heard that The Love Hypothesis also was amazing because I finished Deep End on such a high note. I picked up Say You Remember Me by Abby Jimenez from my local library, and this is also my first Abby Jimenez book. I have high hopes. And then this is the book that I am still currently reading. I have not finished this book per se. This is The Secret History by Donna Tartt, but I'm filming this on the 29th of June, and I definitely think that I could finish this book before July comes. This is my first book from Donna Tartt, and I have been enjoying it. The beginning was a bit intense and dense and confusing and not at all enjoyable, but then when the story picks up, I'm really thoroughly enjoying and at least have an idea where the story is going. This is being praised as the mother of all academia, dark academia, gothic, all those fun stuff. So far, I could definitely see that. This is also another one of those books that very much heavily inspired by Greek mythology and Greek stuff. And so I feel like this month, the theme is just like Greek mythologies and Greek classics. And you know what I mean? Like Red Rising, lots of Greek inspiration. Also Greek. And then I'm also thinking of reading the Games Gods play. And that's also very much inspired by Greek mythologies and Greek traditions and beliefs. And so I've been on my Greek journey. This is a story about Richard Papin. He comes from Plano, which is a small town, small village in California. He's very poor, but he had this notion of wanting to go to college because he didn't want to be like his parents, working a laborious and time-consuming and physical job. He wanted to at least have an education. And at first, he was a pre-med student, but then he realized that biology and science is not for him. He took a turn and he now is taking Greek. He got to this college called Hampden College. Here, he was met with such an interesting instructor and a professor named Professor Julian Morrow. And he's a very, very eccentric person. He's very rich, he's very wealthy. He doesn't need to be paid by the school. In fact, he runs the school, but he doesn't take a lot of students. He only has 6 students, Richard included. So 6 of them, they have this small class in his office. The other students in the class, they took their studies rather seriously. One time when they were talking about how it feels to lose oneself, how it feels to not be human again, to give in to that animal aspect of humans, and they literally took that very seriously. I'm almost halfway through the book, so I don't know where this is going, but so far very dark, very, very dark. I could definitely see why this is one of people's all-time book, but is it mine? We'll see. I also read Onyx Storm by Rebecca Yarros, the 3rd book in the Empyrean series. I did a Onyx Storm reading vlog that's up on my YouTube channel, so you can go check it out. I also included some of my tips in reading such a big fantasy book with my 9-to-5 and full-time schedule. What's the rating for Onyx Storm? I would say, okay, hear me out. It's a 3.75 star, leaning towards a 4 stars. It is a good book. I think it's doing a good job at keeping up the series, and I would definitely be continuing that series by Rebecca Yarros because now I'm just too much invested. I'm too much attached to them. There are some points that I was disappointed because it seems too easy for Violet to be this powerful, perfect, overachieving person. The quests and the missions are just too easy for her. But there are other times when I was like fully hooked, fully addicted, fully glued to the pages. The ending is not necessarily a cliffhanger, and I still don't know where the ending is gonna take us in book 4 and book 5. I had a fun time at Basquiat College with my fellow writers and my fellow Griffin writers, and that's all that matters. So yeah, I highly recommend. I would say it's worth it. If you have read Iron Flame and Fourth Wing, then you would definitely want to pick up book 3. Is it worth it for you to start the series just to read that book? No. But if you want to, you can hop on the train and, see what it's about. That's officially all of the books that I read in June. That's like 11 books, counting The Secret History, which I will be finishing. I think June is a pretty good reading month. I had some great surprises. I found some of my new favorite authors. I found some of the new releases that I've been really enjoying. I also read a pretty diverse genres. I read classics, fantasies, romance, dystopian, memoirs. I was very, very much surprised and proud of myself for keeping that reading goals up, even with the 9 to 5. I've been working on the reading journey and the reading routine for a while, and even though I just got back into reading since March, I was still able to read a lot of books in 2025, and I still think I could read 100 plus books in 2025. Thank you for listening. Thank you for tuning in. Hopefully this video inspires you, motivates you to pick up some books that I mentioned. And if you're new and you would like to see more content of mine, more of my face, more of my reading vlogs, my reading tips, and just my book recommendations, then give me a follow, give me a like, and give me a subscribe. I thank you once again for tuning in and watching this video and hearing me ramble and talk about my love for books. On that note, I'll be seeing you very soon with another video, and until then, happy reading. And let me know down in the comment section what books you finished in June and whether or not you enjoyed them. Bye bye.